Right. So the next one we'll look at is seasonal changes. So we've gone from daily to monthly and now into seasonal changes. So um, seasons, well, obviously there's four seasons in the part of the world that we live in. Um, that I guess is a little bit debatable, and if you are interested in that, you can go to Bureau of Meteorology, and they have a section on their website which looks at the way that Indigenous Australians classify seasons all over Australia. And if you have a look for this part of the world, they actually classify it into six different seasons based on the weather. Um, and it's really fascinating because they capture some the way that they've been written captures some truths that you inherently understand, but I guess never really think about. So one of them is kind of like um, the really stable autumn mornings, the really crisp and stable autumn mornings. That whole aspect of autumn is characterized into one season, and so is the unpredictable rain, like rainfall and thunderstorms of spring, is characterized into another one. But then there's also kind of your early summers and your early winters as well. So seasons, I guess, the way we classify them will change depending on the thing that you're looking at to measure them. So if you're measuring them on temperature, then you might only have a certain amount. If you're measuring seasons based on the way that uh, the animals and plants are responding, then you might classify them differently. For example, in other parts of Australia, we've only got two seasons, wet and dry season in the north, for example. Um, Although I think, again, that's I guess the European terminology. And again, if you look at, I think indigenous seasons in northern Australia, I think there might even be something like eight. So I guess that's something I just neglected to think about there. So again, it depends on what you're looking at, and if you bring, I guess, if you bring the perspective of uh, only thinking about rainfall or only thinking about temperature, then you might miss a lot of the ecological processes that are occurring. Okay, so changing seasons bring changes in light, temperature, rainfall, and that those weather patterns influence everything. Okay, um, so reproduction is often something that is influenced by the seasons. So um, flowers, wildflowers especially, appear in the spring. Some trees and flowers will flower in autumn. Um, Animals are often born in spring because food is more abundant, but then again, that changes depending on where you are and depending on how hot the summers are. So deciduous trees drop leaves in autumn. We don't have many deciduous native trees, but we do have one or two. And migration occurs with the seasons. So one example of migration is the short-tailed shearwaters. Um, and each autumn, from southern Australia, they travel up to 15,000 k's. So they head right up into the northern Pacific Ocean and return in the spring to the same burrow to raise their young. So an awesome migration. And Victoria actually hosts an amazing number of migratory bird species who migrate right up to Alaska. There's some who cross the Himalayas, and um, yeah, there's some amazing migratory birds that go on some amazing journeys. And as I mentioned before, whales again spend summer in Antarctica and then travel up the eastern Australian coast up to their feeding grounds up in Vanuatu and Samoa in the winter because it's much warmer up there. And then when it warms back up down here, they travel back down to Antarctica to feed again. So some amazing seasonal migrations which we can look at. Every um, every flood in the Mitchell River. Okay, so that's how important it is to our lives. This stuff that we're about to talk about has a real impact on your life and what you experience. So we're going to really delve into these next week. So back to this image, and back to looking at what caused this destructive landscape. I had to think about the seasonal changes. Okay, so the short-term seasonal changes that occurred in this landscape. I was visiting Patagonia in summer. Okay, and in summer in Patagonia, I guess the temperature is about 14, 15 degrees Celsius. Okay, nice, crisp, clear days usually. However, in winter in this area, you get temperatures down to negative 40. It gets freezing. It's as far south as you can go without being in Antarctica. With that, you get an awful lot of snow. And snow is never stationary. It is always, once snow and ice forms on a landscape, gravity takes hold and it begins to be affected by gravity. And that is what I believe has caused this landscape. I believe that there's been ice and there's been snow, and it has flowed down this hill to this steep wooded section, or what was once a wooded section, and it has I guess carved away these trees. It has knocked them over and buried them under sheets of ice. And the reason the lower trees are left untouched is probably because they don't experience as much snow. They're not as high altitude, so they don't have exposure to as much snow and ice. And what about the vegetation above that? Well, if you look closely, it looks much more dense and robust and alpine, and looks like it's probably more adapted to that high altitude, high snow and ice environment, and maybe it can survive better. And it looks like perhaps there was one moment where there was a very big ice snowfall or icefall, or maybe one year where there was more ice than the rest, and that has devastated this area. But I do believe that it's a natural landscape because I can't think of anything else that would have caused it. So I think that this destruction is probably caused by glacier movement, or at least ice sheet movement.